I live on Dewey and Cabrillo. How can I get a noise season? Sensor, thank you. At this point, the jets turn sharply up at this point and rev up the jets, and that's from Marilyn Marble.
Well, this is one of the problems with the 1984 agreement is that the agreement locks in place where the sensors are by law. That doesn't preclude us from adding to the sensors. But then the question becomes, what can we do with the information if it turns out that there's what appear to be violations? Again, the 1984 agreement controls. We're very constrained by it. It's a very bad agreement because it really precludes flexibility on the part of the city.
Susan Hartley, Ken Genzer, Jonathan Mann, and if there are no other hands, we'll call this round at that, okay?
Well, there are stationary sensors under the 1984 agreement. However, the airport staff has portable sensors. And you can call the airport department and they can come out and put this sensor in your yard or wherever on your roof and measure so that you can know exactly what amount of noise you're being subjected to. I keep thinking I should do that at my house.
Our next candidate is Ken Genzer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, both answers said what I was going to say. Thanks.
There you go. And Jonathan Mann.
I think we need to aggressively fight this agreement, this 1984 agreement, because it's 7 years from now to 2015 before we can come up with a new agreement, and I don't think we should have an agreement in 2015. What we should have is just stand up to the FAA and close down the airport. So in the meantime, we have to do everything we can, and I think a referendum. Sorry about that. I think a referendum is a good idea to get things moving right now to start that. And that'll put a burr under the saddle of the FAA.
Can I say one more?
Sure, we'll take a follow-up from Susan. It's friendly here.
And I
All right, you can move the camera.
I think the more people that have portable sensors come in their yards so that there can be measurements around the area of what exactly the noise people are being subjected, the noise level that people are being subjected to, the better. And I believe some sensors sit idly at the airport offices and could be used at your homes to measure it. And you could also then put the city on notice of what the noise level is. And there have been studies showing how deleterious being subjected to this noise level can be.
Thank you. Our next question, will you support funding measures to protect Clover Park, especially the tot lot at the south end of the park, from pollution from planes that taxi and take off near the park? Katz?
Well, I think that ties in with funding for the pollution to find out what we have. And certainly if we have it, I would support funding for that use as well. But I think we need to know what we've got before we start funding money for something we're not sure quite what it is.
Thank you. Susan Hartley.
I walk my dogs around Clover Park a lot, and I go by the tot lot, and I shudder because of the fumes you could smell. The tot lot is in the southeast corner of Clover Park, and it's walled in by some of the buildings there, and the fumes back up in there. And so there's only some bushes along there. There needs to be something to try and protect that area, or the city should maybe move that tot lot so that those small children are not subjected to these fumes all the time.
Okay, we have Jerry Rubin, Jonathan Mann, Ted Widger. Anybody else on this question? Okay.
Well, I think Santa Monica has an extra responsibility because of Airport Park. And we have to do everything we can to protect everyone that's so nearby. I think it's all well and good that Richard Bloom has been talking with the city manager, but that needs to be more of a public dialogue, and it should have been a year ago. That's why we need a town hall forum ASAP. It should even be done even before next year. They should start working on it right after this forum ends. Our health is just too important.
Next candidate is Jonathan Mann.
I lived at 2449 Oak for a number of years, and I have a little boy. He's going to be 6 years old pretty soon. My wife, ex-wife, is extremely protective of him, and this is one of the things I agreed with her on. We wouldn't let him play in the park. and we wouldn't let them attend that child care there either. It's a very serious problem. We have to be very aggressive about this, and our children are important to all of us, even if you don't have children of your own. They're the future of our society. So this whole thing, I want to go back to over and over again, is we need to organize now. We need to get the community together even more than they are now. There's a lot of people that haven't even heard about crap, no pun intended. And I think the way to get them involved is to have a forum on the city website, and I stress that over and over again, not just on this subject, but especially for our children's sake.
The next candidate is Ted Winter.
I was at Clover Park yesterday for most of the day. KYSO had its annual soccer fun day there yesterday, and there were thousands of children ranging from age 6 to up to about 16 running around that park. And by the end of the day, the leisure weekend travelers started taking off in their jets from the airport, and I couldn't help but be struck by how much the fumes might be impacting those young lungs. And as I mentioned before, young lungs are much more vulnerable to toxins, and I think, yes, absolutely, we have to look at that issue long and hard and consider that as a major impetus for trying to do things about restricting airport operations.
Great. Our next question is, Orange County is building a park on the airport because the voters said no. Why do you support a referendum? What has Orange County succeeded? Have you submitted freedom of information requests to the FAA on airport pollution?
Could you repeat that? You mean they voted no and now they're building it?
I was hoping that the person who asked that might,
They voted a referendum to not have an airport. There was an airport,
Oh, not to have an airport?
close the airport down.
Oh, El Toro.
That's
Yeah,
El Toro.
Okay, great.
yeah, but if they could do it there, even though it wasn't an active
That's a different
airport,
statement than what you were
Yeah.
reading. Okay.
okay, so we see Richard Bloom, Ken Genzer, Jonathan Mann. We'll start with
seems
those.
like it's something to study. Seems like a good.
Right, well, I think it's a interesting situation down there, but markedly different from what we have. They had a military base that closed, and it's a huge parcel. Not that ours is small, but it's much larger than just the airfield. It was an entire air base. The fact of the matter is, there was a tremendous amount of development that's proposed for that area. It's stalled right now, partly because of the economy. The city of Irvine is having a very difficult time getting the park off the ground. And it kind of points out, and I'm not suggesting what we should or shouldn't do in Santa Monica, but it really is instructive, and I think it's a good question because we can learn from their experience and understand that this is going to be a very, very complicated process for us. And we, again, I just want to say, we have to be very, very careful how we move through this. The FAA is watching. They're watching us right now while we're in this litigation over runway safety areas. If we they're waiting for us to prove, if you will, that what we really want to do is kick out the jets and shut down the airport. And if they can go to court and convince the court right now of that, it materially affects our case. So we are always having to look at the broad scale of issues that we have, and we just really need to do a conscientious job on that.
Our next candidate is Ken Genzer.
I don't want to repeat things Richard said, I just want to add a couple things just on what's different is they didn't close an airport. The federal government closed its base. There was a proposal to start a new airport in its place. That's what the voters turned down. It's a different thing. The other issue is just regarding the dates and this 1984 agreement. The 1984 agreement approved in 1984, before I was around on the council, is essentially it's a settlement of litigation. When the city went to ban jets, there was this three-way lawsuit, or two-way lawsuit with the city. I forget all the parties, but anyway, essentially the result of that was the city entered into a settlement agreement with the FAA, and the third party, the airport, the plane owners, the pilots were sort of left out of the agreement in a way, but there's this agreement that says the city, and it's a contract in effect, the city will keep the airport operational through 2015. The federal government also makes claim in discussions with them that for other reasons, we have to do it to 2023. I think 2023, but whatever, a few years beyond, for other reasons, and the city rejects that and doesn't think the FAA is accurate. but it's clear that we have a contractual obligation to keep it open as settlement of that prior litigation to 2015.
Our next candidate is Jonathan Mann and Susan Harvey.
This is why we need a referendum, because unless we take the law into our own hands legally through the legislative process, that is, if we wait for negotiations and compromises and litigation to just put this thing off until it's too late, before we know it, a compromise has been made. You can't let this happen. If the Orange County residents and voters were able to, it doesn't matter if the airport had already been closed by the government and they wanted to build it, whatever it is, we have an airport. We need to close that down. We need to turn that into a park that's, right now we have a beautiful park in Cloverfield, and that could just merge right in with the airport. We could have a helipad there for emergencies, and that would be plenty, that would satisfy the FAA requirements to have some way in and out of the city. But we do not need an airport. It does not serve the citizens of Santa Monica.
And the next candidate is Susan Hartley.
Well, I agree that we don't need an airport, but we do have contractual obligations, so I think it's premature to think that we can, or wishful thinking to think that we could close the airport before 2015. El Toro's like the Presidio, where the feds closed down the bases, and then it was a question of how were they going to be utilized. The Presidio turned theirs into a park, and El Toro turned theirs into a park. We're a commercial airport. We were not at this. We're not at a military base. So a referendum wouldn't be able to accomplish what John's wanting to do, even though I agree with his long-term goal. And when he talks about closing the airport, there could be like a grass strip down it as a runway for emergency measures. And John had mentioned earlier a heliport, and that would work as far as if there was an earthquake and trying to get people in and out. But El Toro and Santa Monica Airport are like apples and oranges. I hate to admit it.
I understand it's a different situation, but they were thinking of building a commercial airport there, and there was a referendum, and my point is, why don't you leave it up to the voters? If the voters of Santa Monica said no to this airport, I think that would, I think that could be a powerful tool.
Can I
Go ahead, then we're going to let John.
That would be
one
true
more follow-up.
in 2015, when that comes around, definitely.
John, you have another question?
I don't think it's premature to start now. We should have started a long time ago. And if the FAA can try to extend it to 2020 and 2023, there's no reason why we can't start organizing now to close down the airport in 2015. But in the meantime, there's a lot of things that we can do to put brakes on the FAA. The city council is doing some of that, but not enough. We need to get the community behind it. And the way to do that is to have what was mentioned before about virtual virtual town halls is a way to get more citizens involved in this.
All right, Jerry, I closed the stack, but you know what? You're a mensch. Let's talk about 30 seconds.
Well,
Michael Kovacs.
again, the whole thing of a ballot initiative is premature. The issue of a town hall forum is not premature. You want to get as broad-based a grouping as possible from Santa Monica and the other affected areas to talk about this issue. I mean, the airport has had some history here as a recreational airport. We're talking about other things. The jets, I hope we've all come to agree, are just, they shouldn't be here. Whatever we can do, they shouldn't be here. But we need a town hall forum before we start just thinking about organizing for some ballot initiative.
Okay, just shine.
Thanks a lot. Okay, regarding, our airport and the FAA jurisdiction and plans for the future, I would like to see the city enlist the support of our federal representative Henry Waxman more, and possibly even our U.S. senators. I know that Bill Rosendahl has been very proactive, and Ted Lieu. That's on the city and the state level. And I was, in doing some research, I saw that Henry Waxman has been supportive in the past, and I would like to see that continue and that relationship be developed for future plans, whatever they may be.
What do you think?
I think I need to answer that. We have been before
Have you?
council member, or congressional member Waxman, and he is on our side. But we have to be very careful how we handle it with he and Feinstein and Boxer and all the others. So this is something we're working with and we'll be very close to.
And can I just add one?
Sure.
We have specialized law firms in Washington working on our behalf also, trying to work the Congress. I mean, we're not leaving stones unturned here. We're working diligently on this.
Speaking of it being a park, in 1926, Santa Monica residents did a bond measure to buy the land as a park in the first place, and then the state legislature a few years later changed the law defining what a park is so that parks purchased in that way could include airports.
There you go.
So, there you go. All right, so the final question here, unless anybody else has another one, if you do, send one out. But this final round here, there's 4 different questions. They all relate to the study. You can pick and choose.
I just add something to what you just said.
Please. Let's
Along
continue.
those lines, and it's an interesting history of this airport, and it's not always been an airport as they try to make it believe, but in the late 40s, early 50s, Douglas wanted to try and fly jets out of our airport, and I don't know if it was the council or the voters voted for them not to do that, and so that's what caused Douglas to go down to Long Beach. So we were able to stop them then.
Would you support a door-to-door survey to compile data for residents that have health issues relating to air quality, like cancer and respiratory? Why is there no ballpark figure yet for the study if there's been talk about it possibly having been done? Can the science department at Santa Monica College do the study? And would you be willing to appropriate $10K to research? And how should the study be done? So, follow-up study, Mr. Kovacs.
10K and 10,000.
That is 10,000, yeah. Rather than like 10 kroner.
Actually, right now, $10,000 is not that as we're seeing the market right now. 10 years is done. I bring my experience to the Santa Monica Council with my work in the Clinton White House and working with small businesses around the country. In my experience in the business space, a good request for proposal is a way to find out how much the study is going to cost us. So as we keep hearing that we don't know what's going to cost, I think the first step is let's find out what's going to cost, and then let's figure out how we're going to fund it. And I like the idea of grants, I like the idea of user funds. I think that we've got to fund it one way or another. It's not a question whether we do it. So let's deal with that. A door-to-door study sounds appealing. I think we need to have a study. I'm not sure if the door-to-door is the best way to do it, if it's an internet-based one, if it's a phone-based study, but we've got to have a study. So that's not really the question there. As I see it, the issue we're talking about is very much like secondhand smoke. If we had secondhand smoke at our kids' parks, we wouldn't really allow that. And we're allowing something that's very comparable to that if we look at it from a very simplistic point of view.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess we didn't really take an order of anything, did we? So we'll just keep going this direction. Susan Hartley, Richard Boone, Jerry Rubin, Jonathan Knapp.
One thing with the studies, LAX did this very comprehensive study, and they list all the things they found in the jet exhaust, the fumes around the airport. And it's like we don't have to reinvent the wheel again. Why not line up those people that did that study? And they're still in the process of releasing the data. And I did an op-ed piece maybe, I don't know, 8 months ago when Ted Lieu's first bill was coming out, trying to urge City Council to go along with Ted Lieu's bill so we could have this study done. And it lists all these terrible components of this jet fuel. So it's out there. It's not like this is something totally off the wall. There are reputable firms that have done these studies. We can go to them. Why not have a study that's modeled after the LAX study?
Is it that good?
Very much so. Lots of carcinogens.
Next candidate, Ted Winter, then Richard Boone.
Well, I just think that Michael makes an excellent point. There's really, as far as I can see, no reason why we couldn't authorize just issuing an RFP to get some idea of what the cost of these studies might be and have people tell us what they would include in it, and that'd be a great jumping off point for getting some serious data collection. So I agree wholeheartedly with the second.
And next candidate, Richard Boone.
Well, that's certainly might be possible after the AQMD study and after we know what the LAX study, which is in the process of being completed, when we get the data from that, and there are then follow-up recommendations from experts, and certainly recommendations can come through an RFP process. So there are ways of getting to the point, but it has to be an appropriate, strategic, step-by-step process where you gather information along the way, gather it in the right way, in a scientific way that's usable. I want to make one further comment, and that is that we don't allow, the city of Santa Monica doesn't allow jets to take off and land. The FAA requires it. We don't have any choice whatsoever in the matter, and that's part of the great difficulty and issue here, because no matter what we learn from this study, the city is not in the position of saying, if there's something bad happening here, this must stop. We would have to then take that information to the FAA, to the federal government, and convince them. Now, I'm not saying we wouldn't be able to do that. It helps to arm us in doing that if we have the right data and backup. But it's not an automatic, and it's not something the city has jurisdiction automatically to do.
Our next candidate is Jerry Rubin.
Well, when you really think about it, it doesn't seem like it would be all that inappropriate. The federal government were willing to put in some money, or the state government. But just like our schools, just because the state government's not funding our schools adequately doesn't mean that Santa Monica shouldn't take up the ball and do the best we can. This is something that should be easy to do. And the study should be comprehensive, even better than what other cities would do. We owe it to Santa Monica because we're such an environmentally friendly city. So, again, I think we shouldn't put it off simply because we're saying the car, this and that. Start the process now, get it working. As far as surveys, you could do both. You could do it on the computer, in the press, I'm sure would help get the word out, and door to door. All avenues would be best to get input.
And the last candidate in this round is Jonathan Mann.
$10,000 isn't that much, and as I said before, the airport has access to a really large amount of income coming in from the fees and other sources that they have, and I would like to audit that online. The other thing is that I don't know if any of you were here attended the protests when Bush landed at Santa Monica Airport. Did anybody here for that? There was a great turnout. I was almost arrested because they didn't like my T-shirt. It said "Buck Bush" on it. So the only reason they didn't arrest me is because I held up the cell phone and I was holding the conversation, and it was recording on my answering machine. But the attitude is of the airport officials toward me protesting Bush was extremely antagonistic, but the support from the people around me when they saw that what was going on made the police back down. We need to make the FAA back down. And the way to do that is like we did it in the 60s. Get out there and protest until they back down. And we can still do that, even though it's 2008.
Thank you. Actually, the last person on this round was Herbert Somerset.
Jerry's going to need to try that cell phone strategy next time he's.
Actually, Marty was taking pictures.
Actually, I was at the pier a couple weeks ago, and I was on my little milk crate, and they tried to stop me from campaigning, and they called up the city attorney, and the police backed down.
Michael, you had
We've been sitting here discussing on how to have studies made to improve airport pollution problem. And I have a question to ask of everyone here. In view of the fact that we have had this problem for so many years, and in the surrounding areas as well, did we have a town hall meeting or any kind of a referendum when we built a dog park adjacent to the airport, in which pet owners and their pets have to go all the way out to the airport, ingest the fumes from the airport, and perhaps come away eventually with a sickness? That's my question.
And actually, Susan Hartley also had her hand up on this round. So, Susan.
For those of you who live near the airport and smell the fumes, and not the 4 or 5 blocks that Richard Bloom lives from the airport. It's like, I hope you hear this stall, stall, stall. And there's no sense of urgency. And I know Virginia, so many of us that, and Marty, so many of us that smell all these fumes, there is a sense of urgency because we deal with it every day. And we have to move, the council needs to move fast on collecting this data and doing everything that it can.
So our final round here, we're going to, because we have time for one question before we go to our closing statements. We're going to either let people answer Herbert's question, and then I'm going to throw one more in there, and that one is, if the new administration, hopefully there's an election in November that is determinative, and we have a president, and they came out and said, Santa Monica, you're right, 2015, you can close the airport. If you knew that was the case, and it would be up to Santa Monica of what to do with the airport in 2015, what would you do, and why, and how would you get to that decision? So, Richard Bloom, you raise your hand first.
To answer Herbert's question first, yes, we did have public process before Airport Park and the dog park were built, as in all things in Santa Monica. I think regardless of who's in office, as 2015 approaches, we are going to have a large-scale public process to determine the use of the airport. I don't want to predetermine what the outcome of that process might be, because I think there are going to be lots of ideas out there, and I think there's going to be lots of issues. Toxics in the ground might be one of them. That might be determinative of or help determine what might happen there. It may be that after all is said and done, people feel that the propeller planes ought to stay, and we ought to live with that, and increase park space. But there are tons of options for us to consider, and we have to have a process to consider all of them. Fair and open.
And I think, Michael, you have your hand up next. So let's just kind of continue from that side down through, and I'll just further embellish the question to say, what civic needs? Everybody might say, as Councilmember Bloom has, that we want to have a public process, which is fair. What civic needs are there that could be met at the airport as well? I just want to throw that extra, and now you can say it too. Okay. So, Michael,
I think the issue is really simple. We're trying to figure out, what do the people want? I can't tell you what's going to happen on there. I can tell you that from the people I've talked to, and we're numbering the thousands out, people want something done with the airport. Fact. People don't want the jets flying over the airport. Fact. But what we do with it in 2015, I think the point is made that it's actually good to start thinking about it. It's 7 years out, and a lot could happen between now and then. But really, we have to open the dialogue, and we have to start this discussion of what's going to happen there, what do we want there. And really, Santa Monica, the beauty of our city is we've got this activist, progressive sense and nature to us. So let's talk to people. Let's figure out whether it's forums, whether it's other discussions, figure out what are the ideas there, and then let's put it out to the voters.
Thank you. Susan Hartley.
One of my big issues, and actually the reason I'm running, is that the council doesn't listen to the residents. And so it's definitely they need to listen to the residents on what to do with the airport. I'm for closing it down. I'd like to see a park. Toxins in the ground. I just got a thing from, I guess, the county about the toxins in the ground still from Douglas, that they're cleaning them up. I do organic gardening, and I read that there's toxins where I live in the ground, kind of a little frustrating, but they can be cleaning those up. But we definitely need to see what the residents want, and not just Santa Monica, around the area, the region. We take a regional approach to other issues, and we need to take a regional approach to what we do with the airport.
Thank you. Ted Winter.
Well, to first answer Herb Silverstein's question about the dog park by the airport, they actually, the way I recollect is that dog owners actually lobbied very aggressively to have that dog park there, wanted it there. So there was indeed plenty of public input on that issue, and presumably they were aware of the health issues associated with being adjacent to the airport, and made the decision that the opportunity to have a place for their dogs to exercise and run free was more important. And regarding the sort of pie-in-the-sky question, we could magically shut down the airport in 2015, what uses would you envision for that great expanse of land? I think that, to my mind, the two most important priorities we have in the city with what little available land is left is that we need more open space, and everybody's talked about a park, but we do need more housing in the city, and I think we're trying to incorporate some housing there. And we also really need to expand mass transit in this area, and if there's any way to use some of that land to create additional mass transit opportunities, I'd be in favor of looking at that.
Our next candidate is Linda Piera Avila.
Well, one of the issues that I'm campaigning on is more community gardens. So, and I think that there is a community desire for that, community need for that. There are only 3 community gardens in the city right now, and each one of them has a waiting list. So I would really advocate for using at least a portion of that airport land to expand community gardens. I also like Ted's idea about having it be maybe one of the terminuses for light rail. I think that's a good idea. But of course, it would have to go for a vote before the voters. Also, you see how popular the airport park has become, so that shows you that there is a need for more open space. And we can also plant more trees, expand the urban forest. So there are a lot of good possibilities for use of that land after it gets cleaned up and the toxics removed. Also, I'd like to just speak real briefly about the water runoff. The runoff from the airport right now, I think Prop B funds could be used to divert the runoff water to be filtered through Penmar Golf Course to like an underground water storage facility, and then used for irrigation, so then we would conserve some of our water too as the drought proceeds. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bloom?
Well, I don't have a lot to add, because these are the kinds of ideas that would come out in the process. Housing, parks, transit, community gardens. Somebody out there, I'm sure, was going to say cultural arts facilities. But one thing we ought to be thinking about is right now the uses at the airport are relatively passive, particularly when you consider all of that acreage that is just the runway. It's not, and the hangars. It's not generating traffic. You open a regional park there, you put housing and you put cultural arts. We're hemmed in on all sides by very dense residential. What's going to happen to the traffic patterns? So I'll only point that out to say there's lots of things to think about and talk about in this process.
Herbert Silverstein.
It's true, but there's one thing we have to always bear in mind. First of all, how long will it take to take the toxins out of the ground? And if we do investigate this, how many consultants are we going to hire and how much money is going to be used with these consultants? And we're talking about 7 or 8 years away. I think that's something that should be considered.
Thank you. Jerry Rubin.
Well, even though it's an interesting question and a lot of suggestions to put out, I want to push more for a town hall forum. I want to hear what people are saying. It was touched on by Ted Winter before. I think strongly that the airport should not have been excluded from the land use and circulation element plan. It was put under the city manager's office, and I don't think that really served us adequately. And I think we need to bring it in now, even though the land use and circulation element plan is in progress. It's still not too late. It's a major item that was neglected and ignored, and it needs to be brought up right now. And that could segue into further studies. We just can't wait to put off and say, well, we'll wait and then have a town hall forum in 2014. That would be unacceptable.
Jonathan Mann.
I'd like to know where the public process was when they cut down the trees. You know, who had this idea that they were going to transplant trees to the airport? I mean, they certainly aren't going to survive in that kind of...
I beg your pardon. There's a secret garden at the airport composed of about 3 acres, and there's some of the most beautiful ficus trees in all of Santa Monica, right there beside the jet taxi area. Yes, sir.
I'm talking about transplanting
trees
50-year-old
there.
No, I'm talking about
That's
existing
not what I'm
trees.
talking about. I'm talking about...
It's not the forum for debate, it's for the candidates.
Public comment.
There will be traffic problems if you do any development there. I'm against massive development there myself, but I would like to alleviate the traffic problem. I've talked about that before by making bus transportation free to everybody, not just to students from UCLA and Santa Monica and their staff. If it was free to everybody in the city or everybody who came and worked in the city, that would alleviate the traffic.
Thank you. The next candidate is Herb Katz.
Well, the interesting part that I'm hearing is what we've started here, it's a workshop. Which is what we're all saying, you need a workshop. You need several workshops, and you get all these ideas back, passive, active, transportation, etc. This isn't the place to do it, and I'm not gonna about to decide what we're gonna do with the land when it's come back as something other than the airport. So I think we get workshops going. It's that simple.
And Gensler.
Well, I will confess that I don't remember what the question is, but I'll try and answer it anyway, without anybody else.
I better stop you.
You know, I can just reiterate a little bit about what my thoughts are about the airport and what should happen. I think that one of the options that we should consider is, can we make the airport friendly for neighborhoods? And that means, you know, dealing with the jet fumes. Probably the only way to deal with that effectively is to ban jets and make it really neighborhood friendly and safe in all aspects. I know we don't have the authority to do that at this point until 2015, although we're pursuing the C&D ban at this time. So assuming we get to 2015 and we can't do that, then I think we need to close the airport. We will have a fight, and it'll be a protracted litigation with the FAA. I think we can weather that out, and we'll prevail on that. And then the question is, what happens? I don't know. That's got to be a big dialogue. It's not a workshop or two. You have workshops, you have, I'm sorry, but unless we have city staff do it, who have plenty to do already, you have consultants, and indeed, we probably should get international class planners and people to start thinking about options. Again, present that to the public and start looking at it, weighing pros and cons, mixing A, B, and D, or parts of this one or that one, and coming to a consensus on what to do. Do we wait to 2015 to do that? No, we start earlier. This is probably in the time frame we start beginning to think about that and start moving that process forward. It's a long and thoughtful process. It is an amazing piece of property. If anybody's been up on the platform where the runway is, it's just got magnificent views and breezes, and it's a great place. Huge potential for this community and the surrounding areas in Los Angeles, but we have to think really carefully.
In that time.
All right, we'll start with our closing statements. Michael Kovacs.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. When you're thinking about voting for candidates, Michael Kovacs is the one who wants to make what Santa Monica wants to happen.
Susan Hartley.
Not enough's been happening with regard to the airport. The city council has stalled on addressing the real issues of the airport. We've had, the community's been complaining about the jet fumes, the risk with the runway safety areas. Finally, after many years, they did something about the runway safety area. And we're in the litigation, and I applaud them for that and for spending or budgeting the $250,000 for that and whatever else it will take. People need to realize that not only with the jet fumes, but with the prop planes use leaded fuel. So leaded fuel is raining down on that neighborhood also, and on the children in that neighborhood. We need to make the pollution, we need to have the health risk studies. I'm for funding it, whatever it's going to cost. There's nothing novel, nothing unique. They've been done elsewhere. And let's just do it. Let's quit the stalling. It's an urgent issue.
Our next candidate is Ted Winthrop.
Yeah, I've said this at other forums, and people ask me why I'm running for city council, and I always say I'm running because I have these two small children, and I want this city to be an even more enviable place to live in the future, and I think that the issue around the airport is so critical to our future. I mean, we have people living in what is basically a hazardous environment, and it's just not right. We really need to do everything we can aggressively and immediately to try to eliminate some of both the safety issues from the actual aircraft operations and the health issues from the emissions from these aircraft. And I applaud the City Council for taking the bold stand they did against the operation of the Class C and D aircraft, but I think we do need to go further and start really having hard data on the health risks that the airport poses with the fumes that come out of the back pipes of these aircraft, and we need to start boldly going forward against the FAA and challenging the aircraft operations based on the health risks.
Our next candidate is Linda Guerra Avila.
Well, I agree with everything that Mike and Susan and Ted just said. Additionally, I want to bring up one other idea just for thought. that I didn't get to mention earlier, and that is, okay, the FAA bans commercial aircraft at general reliever airports. That's what Santa Monica Airport is considered, because it relieves the traffic from LAX. But yet, these jets that come in are considered, are fractional ownership and the rental of private jets. So I think they could be considered, in a way, commercial, even though the FAA says they aren't commercial. And I'm just wondering if there could be, somewhere along the lines of a strategy employed, where there could be a test case lawsuit, maintaining that these jets are commercial and therefore FAA should ban them because they're not supposed to have commercial aircraft at general reliever airports. Lastly, one other comment, kind of on a related issue. I just want to bring up the idea of human trafficking. And I just wonder how many victims of human trafficking come through Santa Monica Airport. So that's a side issue that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Richard Bloom.
Thank you for hosting this and for having us. I'd like to talk about a few positive things that have happened that we haven't talked about yet this evening. First of all, not long after I came on the council, we put a ballot measure on in Santa Monica that allows us to raise fines, and we are now able to more effectively deal with aircraft that are violating the noise ordinance. It hasn't made a huge difference in people's lives because the volume of jet takeoff and landings has continued to go up so much. Airport Park was something that we had to work on and push through. There were legal issues. We decided to hell with the legal issues. That park was just too important to this community, and now it's built. Thousands of children and people and dog lovers use that park every day. And Chris is here sitting in the back. We're going to have a DC-3 monument that's going to be built at Airport Park in the very, very near future. It's going to be a great asset to the city. So there are lots of difficult issues, but there's some good things happening at the airport too. Oh, and we added, we are now encouraging cultural facilities in the hangar buildings down on Airport Avenue, and that's been a really positive turn.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Herbert Silverstein.
Well, I would like to thank you all for coming out in the amounts that you've had. We've had other forums and we haven't had the attendance that we should have had. You people have made our night. And also, I think we've made some strides and given some wonderful thoughts on what to do in the future. And hopefully we can accomplish something in the next year or two. Thank you.
Our next candidate is Jerry Rubin.
Again, I want to say thanks to concerned residents against airport pollution and Marty and Joan for putting this on and help from Friends of Sunset Park in the community. I think everyone knows how horrible it is. I was out there. I smell it. I know what's going on. I know how upset the people are and the pollution settles on the trees right in their own backyards and the kids. And this is something that we have to make a ¡1 priority. And I appeal to everyone, whoever wins the election. And again, I urge you all to register to vote and maybe vote for a change. Yeah, a change, not locally and nationally. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Mann.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, and if any of you want to speak to me afterwards privately, including this gentleman right here, I would love to hear what you have to say. Because, I consider you all heroes because you showed up. My whole goal in running for city council is to get more participation from people who live here so we can have a voice in city government. We need leadership in this council, the kind of leadership that leads the way to protect us and to speak for us, but they're not going to listen to us unless we speak out. And the way to do that is what Michael Colbax was talking about. He's the only person up here who agrees with me about a virtual town hall. The last time I spoke before this group, I was the only one that wanted to close down the airport. Now the majority of people up here. So change is coming, it's going to happen, and we're going to have our way with this airport. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Herb Katz.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for hosting this. Marty, it's a good job. The organization is good. We learned a lot tonight. We always learn at forums. And I am running for reelection. I've been involved with that airport since back when we first moved here at Sunset Park, which was 1963, in the same house that I'm still in. And I'm very involved, and even more involved lately since I've become mayor and went back to Washington on the C&D aircraft. And since this whole thing with the FAA is beginning to come to a head. And I will continue to fight for the airport, for the people representing the use of the airport or non-use of the airport. And as far as I'm concerned, in 2015, we have to close it.
And finally, Ken Genzer.
I think we've discussed tonight how complicated some of these issues are. I don't believe there are easy solutions, and I don't think there are any single answers as to what the best approach is. I certainly don't claim to have all the answers. What I do promise, though, is that I will diligently pursue solutions, incorporate people's comments into my thinking, and try and develop the best strategies to reach the best possible solutions that are realistically possible. That's really all I can promise that I will do, and I would love to be reelected to keep doing that.